Hey friends, and welcome to our continuation of our Bible study in Genesis. Today we're going to be looking at Genesis chapter 4, and Genesis chapter 4 focuses on the story of Cain and Abel. So if you're interested in that, please take a few minutes to read Genesis chapter 4 and then come back here and we'll talk about that chapter together. If this is your first time here, I just want to personally welcome you to the HomeGrown Ministries YouTube channel. I'm DJ, and on this channel I strive to provide you with biblical wisdom and encouragement to strengthen your walk of faith. So one of my favorite things about the start of chapter 4 of the book of Genesis is, remember, in chapter 3, that's the fall of man. Adam and Eve sin, they disobey God. God kicks them out of the Garden of Eden. But before he kicks them out of there, he gives them a promise. He promises them a Messiah. So remember, in our last video, Genesis chapter 3 is right here. This is where the promise of a Messiah is made. The rest of this, the rest of the Bible, the entire Bible, is God fulfilling his promise to provide a Messiah. But why I like the start of Genesis chapter 4 is this is where Eve gives birth to her son Cain. And she shows how impatient human nature is. Because when you directly translate the word Cain, it essentially means, and this is a DJ translation, here he is. Adam and Eve thought that Cain was the promised Messiah. Cain, their very next son, right after they leave Eden, was going to be the one that redeemed them. And I just laugh because it shows how impatient we are with God's promises. Because it takes thousands of years following the fall before mankind is redeemed through the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. But Eve's first child, she names him Cain because in her mind, God fulfilled his promise. And as we see throughout the rest of this chapter, that's far from the truth based on what Cain does and how he treats God and his brother. So the next section we look at is Cain and Abel's offering to God. And one of the questions I've heard time and time again is, why was it that God didn't look favorably on Cain's offering, but looked favorably on Abel's offering? And one of the things that, this isn't directly in the Bible, but you'd have to, I'm assuming at least, that someone, probably Adam and Eve, their parents, taught them about sin and taught them about the fall and taught them about how we can be redeemed with God through sacrifices that we later see in the book of Leviticus, after the Israelites flee Egypt, and Moses establishes the law for God. We see all those later. So these were probably given to them verbally, and they're told, hey, to come to God, we have to, be free of our guilt, and to do so, we must have some type of blood offering. And what we see here is that Cain doesn't have a blood offering. Cain doesn't follow those instructions. Cain provides some fruits of the soil. It doesn't even say he provides the best fruits of the soil. He just provides something. Where Abel actually gives fat portions from some of the firstborn of his flocks. The best of the best is what Abel provides. And what you see here is Abel demonstrates his faith. He takes what he is told by his parents, most likely, about how to be redeemed with God, how to approach God, how to have an acceptable offering to God, and follows that with faith by providing the fat portions of the firstborn of his flock. Where Cain completely rejects that and does it his way. And I don't know about you, but anytime I've tried to do life my way, I always end up falling short. And this is exactly what happens to Cain. And the best part about this is God doesn't immediately rebuke Cain. He gives him a loving warning. He tells him, hey, if you do what's right, won't you be accepted? Which tells me that Cain knows what's right. Cain knows what he should have done. And Cain knows that he disobeyed. And then God continues by saying, listen, sin is crouching at your door if you do not do what is right. And you must roll over it. And that's our call today. We know, all of us know, myself included, I'm a wretched, sinful man. And I know that sin is crouching at my door every single day. And I have to do everything in my power to control it, to be the Lord over those temptations. Now, thankfully, we believe in a loving God. We believe in Jesus Christ, his Son, who gives us power over those temptations. But we still must go to God and ask for that power over that temptation. Because if you don't, sin is crouching at your door. And like Cain, it will rule over you. Now, in Cain's anger, he kills his brother. In his anger, based on his own inability or his own choice to not listen to God's regulations, to not listen to God's law, he decides to take it out on his brother, and he kills his brother Abel. And notice here that there is no weapon mentioned. So this is what's interesting to me, because there's been this meme that's been going around for as long as I can remember that's a pro-gun meme. And essentially it says, I don't know why you want to take away guns, because Cain killed Abel with a rock. And that's not true, so I want to point that out. If you've seen that meme, it is not true. The Bible doesn't indicate how Cain kills his brother, and it just shows how evil the heart of man is. If the desire is there, whether he killed him with a rock, a stone, a stick, or his bare hands, he still killed his brother. You don't need an instrument to do that for you. It is our wicked nature that leads to sin. And that's exactly what we see here, is that Cain's wickedness led him to kill his brother, regardless of how he did it. Now, God seeks Cain out. And this is interesting to me, because God seeks us out. And it's important to notice that God is seeking Cain out after he sinned. We're reminded in the New Testament that God seeked us out. He came after us, and although we were sinners, he still chose to die for us. And that's exactly what we're seeing in the Old Testament. Again, I love to make that correlation when we see God being a merciful God, even in the Old Testament, because he's the same yesterday, today, and forever. And so he's showing mercy to Cain by seeking him out, even though he knows that Cain has sinned. Now, Cain's attitude is what gets him in trouble. When God asks Cain, where is his brother? He says, am I my brother's keeper? And at that point, based on his wickedness, based on his response, that's when God pronounces judgment against Cain. God gave him the opportunity to confess his sin, and most likely would have been forgiven. However, his attitude is poor. So this is a calling for you, friends. If you have a sin in your life that you know is something you're choosing to do, confess it. Give it up to the Lord. Do not be stubborn like Cain, because at that point, God pronounces his judgment. And I believe that God still judges people for their sins today. Whether you see it in this life or the next, you will be judged for your sin that you continue to do volitionally. As a Christian, get rid of it. Get rid of it. Then when we see this judgment being proclaimed, Cain is remorseful. But he's not remorseful about his actions. He's remorseful about the punishment. He says the punishment is more than I can bear. So even after the judgment is declared, Cain doesn't admit that he was wrong. Cain's not remorseful for killing his brother. He's just concerned, again, about himself. And this goes into what I typically believe. I typically believe people are neither good nor bad. They're just selfish. And in this situation, Cain's being very selfish. He's more concerned about the punishment that he was given than he is about the action that he took that led to that punishment. And I see that in my kids' lives. My kids are very young, but even now, when they are disciplined for something they do wrong, oftentimes they are remorseful about the discipline and not necessarily about the action. So we have to take time to explain to them why they're being disciplined and make sure that they understand. And God does that with us. God, being a loving Father, disciplines his children. So if you are a Christian, expect to be disciplined by God, especially and definitely when you are living a life of sin. If you claim to be a Christian, if you are a Christian, but you're still sinning, expect that discipline. It's bound to happen because God disciplines his children as a good father should. Then the next question I get a lot about the Old Testament is, where did Cain get his wife? So in the very beginning of chapter 4, I think it's verse 3. Yeah, in verse 3, start of verse 3, it says, in the course of time, Cain brought some of the fruits of the soil, so on and so forth. So in the course of time, that verse 3 allows for time, the passing of time. And during that time, the earth is being populated by Adam and Eve and their children. So Cain most likely married his sister or a very close blood relative. At that time, we don't have the laws in Leviticus. Time has not passed, so they didn't really have a choice, and I'm sure that God had intended it that way, that was perfectly fine at this time. There's probably not genetically risky, which is why we end up seeing those laws come out in the future. But at this time, Cain most likely married his sister or his blood relative. So in case you were curious about that, that's my 2 cents that are worth about a half penny. So then after that, we see, what I like to see here is the end of chapter 4 shows all the things that came from Cain or his descendants. And it's encouraging because even though he's a sinner like me, even though he did wrong and disobeyed God like I do on a daily basis, we still see these great things that came from Cain and his descendants. So Cain builds the first city that we are made aware of. His descendants tamed animals. They made music. They were the ones that did metalworking. So all these good things still came from this sinful man. And that gives me hope because I fall short of the glory of God every day too, guys. And I can still do good for God. The course of my life is still something God can use for his glory and his purpose, even though I am sinful, even though I am wretched. Because remember, guys, we are redeemed as Christians not because of what we do, but because of what Christ does for us. And that's super important to remember. Then we also see Lamech's story. I like to talk about Lamech's story just because it's interesting. He essentially is telling his wives that he was injured, and through that injury he ends up killing the man who injured him. So it's a story of self-defense, and he's essentially saying that, hey, if Cain killed his brother Abel and God protected him, I'll be even more justified because when I killed a man, it was in self-defense. It wasn't premeditated. And so we start to see, and we continue to see throughout the course of the Bible, where self-defense is something that God allows. Then at the very end of chapter 4, this is where Seth is born. This is super significant because if you are unaware, in the Gospel of Luke, we see Seth being the individual that leads to the lineage of Jesus. So it goes, God to Adam, Adam to Seth, and then all the other descendants that lead to Jesus. So Seth is the line in which Jesus descends from. So we do eventually, not with Cain, but we do eventually get to the point where we see God starting to fulfill the promise. And as Christians, we get to see that hindsight is 20/20 because in the Gospel of Luke, we get to see the genealogy of Jesus. And one of the first people after Adam is Seth. So Adam and Eve have direct communion with God at the very beginning of Genesis. And by the end of chapter 4, we see that due to the fall of man, it doesn't take very long before people are calling on the name of the Lord. That's how chapter 4 ends. And it says, at this time, people began to call on the name of the Lord. And that's so interesting to me because it shows how quickly we went from direct communion with God to having to cry out to him, because our sin has now made us unworthy of his presence. Now God still chooses to have communion with us. Today even, God still chooses to speak to us through his word. However, we lost that direct communion where we can physically walk with him in the garden because of the fall. However, rejoice, Christians, because through the death and resurrection of Jesus, one day we will be called home and reunited, and we'll be able to have that direct communion with God once again. So friends, that's my review of chapter 4 of the book of Genesis, or my review of chapter 4 of the book of Genesis. It's late today. My brain's starting to not work. If there was anything that I said that really spoke out to you, let me know. If there's something that you think I missed or something you think I'm wrong about or you see differently, please let me know in the comments down below. Remember, all scripture is God-breathed and good for correcting as well. So if I said something that you think is not right, please let me know. Happy to have your interpretation of this passage as opposed to just me rambling on and on and on about this. I've talked long enough. So Christian friends, please continue to be the salt of the earth, be the light to the world. Go encourage somebody else today because the world desperately, desperately needs it. I'll see you in the next video. Bye.